may believe that you already know yourself, that the personality you wear, as naturally as your skin, is a simple reflection of your nature. Yet the mind, especially the introverted, intuitive mind, is not a surface that can be quickly surveyed. It is a labyrinth, a temple filled with symbols, shadows, and half-forgotten echoes that shape the soul in silence. Among these minds, those most frequently misunderstood by the world are the INTJ and the INFJ, whose inner landscapes are so intricate that even they themselves struggle at times to decipher their own currents. I would like to speak to you today about this peculiar kind of empath, the one hidden beneath the mask of strategy or mystical vision, the one who walks the earth as though living in two worlds at once. When you encounter such a person from the outside, you may see only a quiet figure, deliberate and composed, someone whose words come measured and whose eyes seem to weigh not only what is present, but what is still unborn. Society, ever hungry for immediacy and simple labels, calls this person distant, cold, or overly idealistic. Yet what lies within is neither coldness nor abstraction, but an overwhelming flood of images, impressions, and archetypal forces that course through the psyche like subterranean rivers. The INTJ and the INFJ are not merely personalities described in typologies. They are vessels through which the unconscious insists on speaking, and when this unconscious is porous, when the boundary between the self and the other is thin, empathy arises not as a choice, but as a condition of existence. They cannot help but feel the psychic atmosphere, to absorb the emotional undercurrents of a room, to know the despair in another without it being spoken. But let us not romanticize this gift too quickly, for the empathic intuition of such a mind is also its great burden. Imagine that you are standing at the crossroads of your own soul, and every passerby leaves behind not only their shadow, but their unspoken pain, which seeps into you as if it were your own. You begin to carry layers upon layers of emotions that do not belong to you. This accumulation becomes a kind of psychic possession, a slow erosion of one's own voice under the relentless chorus of others. And because these introverted, intuitive types are naturally drawn to pattern, to meaning, to the deeper story beneath events, they cannot merely feel, they must interpret, weave, and connect. They find themselves constructing invisible constellations of human suffering, often believing they must redeem or heal what they have absorbed. Thus, the misunderstood empath lives always in tension, drawn towards salvation, yet haunted by exhaustion. In dreams, these individuals often find themselves in vast symbolic landscapes. I recall a patient who was of this nature, who dreamt repeatedly of standing in a library filled with ancient manuscripts. The books whispered, but their words dissolved into dust when opened. She was tormented by the sense that she was meant to know something vital. Yet, it slipped away at the very moment of grasping. Here we see the archetype of the seeker, the one called to knowledge beyond the present age. But we also see the impossibility of containing what the unconscious offers. The empath of intuitive design is condemned both to receive more than others can imagine and to struggle with how little can be retained in conscious clarity. Their empathy is a library of ghosts, voices that refuse to remain silent, demanding to be carried. It is easy to misunderstand such people. Some will call them manipulative, for they can sense what others do not say and speak to hidden motives. Others will say they are detached, for when overwhelmed by emotional flood, they retreat behind a wall of silence. Yet neither judgment touches the truth. What is seen as manipulation is in fact the consequence of psychic receptivity. To intuit the soul of another is to stand already in the place where motives are born. What is seen as detachment is in fact a defense, a necessary sanctuary where the inner citadel is rebuilt after being stormed by the outer world. To call the INFJ or INTJ empath, manipulative or cold is like calling the ocean deceptive. Because its tides retreat, the movement is not force. It is rhythm, survival, and law. And yet, how shall such a person live if they surrender entirely to empathy? They dissolve, losing the fragile distinction between self and other, becoming a receptacle for the world's unending cries. If they harden themselves against it, they lose the very essence that grants them vision, the subtle connection to archetypes, to destiny, to the future. They so often glimpse before others can perceive it. The solution lies not in rejection but in integration. This is the central task of individuation, to draw into consciousness that which would otherwise consume us from below. The misunderstood empath must learn to meet their own shadow, the neglected child within, who says, I am not responsible for the wounds of all. To embrace the shadow here is to affirm boundaries, not as selfishness, but as sacred structure, the bones without which the body collapses. I remember another dream that illustrates this. A man of this type dreamt he was walking through a forest and found cages filled with birds. Each bird sang with human voices, pleading for release. He opened cage after cage until he realized that the forest itself was endless, filled with cages without number. In despair, he collapsed, unable to save them all. At that moment, a figure appeared, cloaked in dark feathers, who told him, your task is not to free them all, but to free yourself among them. Here the unconscious revealed the truth. The empath must recognize the illusion of omnipotence. The call to heal everything is itself a possession, a distortion of empathy into grandiosity. True empathy requires humility, to know that one's task is not universal salvation, but faithful presence in what is near. This is why the INTJ and INFJ empaths so often feel alien. They carry within them a prophetic current, but one that is too subtle, too symbolic, to be recognized by the pragmatic world. They sense outcomes before events ripen. They feel betrayals before words are spoken. They discern collective moods before nations themselves awaken to crisis. And so they are mistrusted, accused of being paranoid, dramatic, or obsessive. But the collective unconscious speaks most strongly through such vessels. And like Cassandra of old, they are doomed to be right yet disbelieved. Their tragedy is not only being misunderstood, but being condemned for the very vision that later proves true, let us look more closely at the mechanics of this empathy. Introverted intuition draws its energy inward, perceiving not surface reality, but the deep symbolic patterns that underlie it. When joined with feeling, as in the INFJ, this becomes a sensitivity to the emotional archetypes of others, a mystical participation in their soul. When joined with thinking, as in the INTJ, the empathy is less sentimental, but no less real. It manifests as a strategic foresight, an uncanny ability to anticipate what others will do, because the unconscious mind has already mapped their symbolic trajectory. Both are forms of empathy. Though the world recognizes only the sentimental kind, the INTJ's foresight is empathy disguised as logic. The INFJ's compassion is foresight disguised as feeling. In both, the unconscious is the true master, but the unconscious is not only a fountain of insight, it is also a devourer. The empath who does not know themselves becomes prey to projections. They absorb the anima and animas of others, taking into themselves the unlived lives, the rejected selves, the denied passions of those they encounter. They find themselves burdened with emotions that erupt as if from nowhere, when in truth they are the disowned shadows of the community pressed into the empath soul. This is why the misunderstood empath often falls into depression or anxiety without clear cause. They are carrying the psychic refuse of others. Their task is to discern what belongs to me and what belongs to the other. Without this discernment, they live not their own life but the collective's unconscious. Thus the path of such a person must lead towards symbolic awareness. When you dream of a drowning child, ask not only what trauma of mine does this reflect, but also whose neglected child am I bearing within me that is not mine to raise? When you feel rage ignite without provocation, ask whether it is your own anger or the archetypal wrath of a culture repressed for centuries. The empathic intuitive is called to become a kind of priest of the psyche, offering rituals of separation, sacrifices of false responsibility, to appease the gods of projection. Only then can they live with integrity, carrying empathy, not as curse, but as vocation. The misunderstood empath is often accused of being too serious, too heavy, too unwilling to indulge in the shallow pleasures of life. But this is not because they disdain joy. It is because their joy is of a different order. They are animated not by the laughter of distraction, but by the ecstasy of meaning. To touch an archetype, to glimpse the unfolding destiny of a soul or civilization, is for them the highest form of joy. They laugh when they see the cosmic joke hidden in tragedy. They weep when they glimpse the eternal shining through a mundane event. Their seriousness is not gloom but reverence, and if they sometimes seem withdrawn, it is because they have touched something too holy for casual words. I say to you, if you are of this kind, do not despise your difference. The world will not easily understand you, nor should it. You are not here to be easily consumed, but to serve as an aperture through which the unconscious becomes conscious. You are misunderstood because you are ahead, not behind, but take care also not to mistake your difference for superiority. The gift is not yours alone. It belongs to the collective that speaks through you. To hoard it in pride is to become possessed by the very archetypes you serve. Instead, offer it gently, sparingly, as a whisper rather than a proclamation. For the world resists prophecy shouted, but it may yet heed prophecy spoken in love. There is a paradox at the heart of the empathic intuitive mind. Though it longs to be understood, its very nature ensures misunderstanding. For when others attempt to approach it with ordinary language, they find themselves speaking to a mirror that reflects not only their own face, but the hidden face behind it. The INFJ and INTJ empaths, whether they recognize it consciously or not, reveal to others the unconscious image they are trying to conceal. This is why they attract suspicion and sometimes hostility. People sense instinctively that the empath sees too much and the ego recoils at being exposed. The eyes of such a person are like alchemical vessels in which the truth is distilled from the vapors of ordinary conversation. And when you stand before them, you feel as if your own secrets have been whispered into the air, not by words, but by presence. This phenomenon is not the product of mystical fantasy, but of archetypal reality. The empath of intuitive structure functions as a vessel of the self-archetype, the central ordering principle of the psyche. The self is not merely personal, it is transpersonal, a bridge to the collective unconscious. When the empath is attuned, the self speaks through them, not only for their own individuation, but for the healing of the collective. Yet this position is dangerous, for to bear the self without sufficient ego strength is to risk inflation. To believe oneself divine rather than a channel of the divine. Thus many misunderstood empaths vacillate between feeling like insignificant outcasts and feeling like messianic saviors. Both extremes are distortions. True balance is to know I am a vessel, but not the source. I recall a woman whose temperament bore this empathic signature. In her dreams, she wandered through cathedrals of glass, where beams of light pierced her body until she felt transparent, as though no boundary remained between her and the sacred. She awoke exhausted, as if she had given her very essence away. In analysis, we saw how she allowed others to pour their needs into her, believing that to refuse them was to betray her calling. But the unconscious revealed a different truth, that she was being consumed by the archetype of the martyr. For the empath, the temptation to sacrifice endlessly is as strong as the temptation of power, and both can be masks of shadow. When empathy becomes self-destruction, it is no longer love, but compulsion. The task is not to extinguish empathy, but to sanctify it with boundaries. Boundaries for such a mind are not merely psychological defenses. They are symbolic structures. Think of the mandala, the sacred circle that appears spontaneously in the dreams and art of those in crisis. The mandala is not drawn for decoration. It arises as the psyche's attempt to contain overwhelming forces. For the misunderstood empath, building boundaries is akin to drawing a living mandala around the soul. Within it, they can discern what is theirs and what belongs to others. Without it, they are flooded, and their empathy turns from gift into poison. This is why solitude is so crucial for the INFJ and INTJ. Their withdrawal is not rejection of others, but the necessary creation of the sacred circle, the inner temple where they can sort, interpret, and restore. Yet, this solitude is again misunderstood. Others call it aloofness, arrogance, or detachment. But for these types, solitude is the crucible of individuation. It is in aloneness that they encounter their own depths, confront their own shadow, and hear the voice of the self. If they are denied solitude, they become brittle, drained, and resentful. If they embrace it wisely, they emerge luminous, bearing insights that can heal. Consider the ancient image of the prophet in the desert. He withdraws not because he despises his people, but because he must face the archetypes unmediated, so that when he returns, he brings not his own opinion, but the voice of the eternal. The empath too requires such deserts of the soul, but here lies another danger. The INFJ and INTJ empaths may cling so tightly to solitude that they avoid human intimacy. Fearing that closeness will overwhelm or entangle them, they may dream of connection, yet shun it when offered, building walls so strong that even their own desires cannot enter. This, too, is a shadow of empathy. True individuation does not end in isolation, but in conscious relationship. To relate with boundaries intact is the higher calling. To remain perpetually distant is only half the journey. Thus, the misunderstood empath must learn the sacred rhythm of distance and closeness, retreat and return, solitude and communion. In many myths, we find figures who embody this rhythm. Take the figure of Hermes, the messenger who moves between worlds. He is at home both in Olympus and in the underworld. Likewise, the empathic intuitive must learn to traverse the worlds of solitude and society, carrying messages between the unconscious and the collective. If they dwell only in Olympus, they lose touch with human suffering. If they dwell only in Hades, they drown in shadow. Their vocation is to walk between, to be bridge bearers, and yet bridges are often unnoticed. People see only the destinations, not the structure that connects them. This is why the empath so often feels unseen. They are the path others walk upon to reach meaning. But the path itself is forgotten. Dreams again reveal this archetypal role. Another patient of this temperament dreamt she was a bridge suspended over a dark chasm. People walked across her, carrying torches and burdens. She felt both honored and crushed. In analysis, we saw that she was living as the bridge, but not as the traveler. She bore others' journeys, but neglected her own. This is the central wound of the empath, to forget that one must also walk, not only be walked upon. When they reclaim their own path, when they remember that they too are travelers, their empathy ceases to enslave and begins to liberate. And so the misunderstood empath must continually ask, am I living my own life, or am I living the unlived lives of others? Jung once said that neurosis is always the substitute for legitimate suffering. In the empath, neurosis often arises from carrying pain that was never theirs to carry. The legitimate suffering they must endure is the loneliness of being misunderstood, the weight of discerning self from other, the ache of prophetic vision unheeded. If they avoid this suffering, they take on illegitimate suffering, instead the endless burden of others' unresolved shadows. To be whole, they must accept their own cross, not the world's. Now, let us speak of the paradoxical relationship the INFJ and INTJ empath has with time. Their intuition draws them forward, sensing what has not yet occurred, glimpsing patterns before they are visible. This gives them an uncanny foresight, but it also isolates them, for they are never quite in the same moment as those around them. They are half a step ahead, living already in the future. This future orientation is often misread as control, manipulation, or cold calculation, yet it is simply the way their unconscious operates. They are compelled to trace lines of destiny, to see where a word spoken today will bloom into consequence tomorrow. Their empathy is not limited to the present emotion. It extends into the unseen trajectory of the soul. But such foresight is a heavy burden. Imagine seeing not only the wound of a person, but the tragedy their wound will create if unhealed. Imagine watching a friend's bitterness calcify into lifelong isolation, or seeing in a young person's eyes the shadow of a destruction decades away. To carry such vision without being able to alter it is torment. Here, the empath faces the temptation of control, to try to steer others, to impose direction, to prevent what they see. Yet to do so is to overstep, to play the role of fate. The true task is more difficult: to witness, to warn when possible, but to release the outcome. For fate is not ours to govern, and empathy becomes tyranny when it refuses to let others walk their own path. Consider the ancient figure of Cassandra, cursed to prophesy true but never be believed. The INFJ and INTJ empath knows this curse intimately. They warn, they plead, they foresee, but their words fall on deaf ears. Only later do others realize that they were right. This breeds bitterness, a sense of futility, and sometimes withdrawal from human contact. Yet even Cassandra's curse contains wisdom. It is not the outcome, but the act of speaking truth that matters. The empath must learn to release the need for recognition. Their calling is to bear witness, not to be celebrated. When they find peace in this, their bitterness transforms into quiet strength. I say again, the most misunderstood empath is not a sentimental healer alone, nor a manipulative strategist, nor a mystical recluse. They are all of these and none of these, for they live at the intersection of archetypes. They are seers, bridges, prophets, and wounded children. They are mirrors and wanderers, vessels and travelers. To understand them fully is impossible, even for themselves. But to honor them is to recognize that their strangeness is sacred. Do not think this means they are exempt from shadow. On the contrary, their shadow is often darker precisely because their light is strong. The empath who denies their own aggression becomes a silent manipulator, using subtle guilt and expectation to control. The empath who denies their sexuality becomes entangled in the projections of others, absorbing desires that turn toxic within them. The empath who denies their need for power becomes inflated with secret fantasies of omnipotence, convinced they alone can save. To be whole, they must descend into these shadows willingly, owning their anger, a desire and hunger for control, lest these forces erupt unconsciously. It is a painful work, for the empath would rather see themselves as purely good, purely giving, purely attuned. But individuation demands otherwise. Only when they embrace their own shadow can they truly serve others without entanglement. Only when they admit their own hunger can they feed others without devouring. Only when they face their own darkness can they carry the light without it blinding them. And so, I tell you, if you are such a one, misunderstood, burdened, visionary, do not flee from yourself. Do not numb your empathy with endless distraction, nor inflate it into grandiose illusion. Stand at the threshold of your soul and know you are bridge and traveler, vessel and self, prophet and child. Your misunderstanding is not failure. It is initiation, for to be misunderstood by the world is often the sign that you are understood by the unconscious. There is a certain loneliness that defines the life of the misunderstood empath. A loneliness that is not simply the absence of others, but the presence of a deeper reality that no one else seems to notice. You may walk through a crowded street, surrounded by voices and laughter, and yet feel the entire atmosphere pressing upon you like a second skin. Every glance carries a fragment of someone's story. Every gesture carries the residue of unspoken pain. Every silence resounds with what is repressed. And though no one else appears disturbed, you are already exhausted by what you cannot shut out. This is not a choice, but a condition of being. To be INFJ or INTJ with such porous empathy is to live perpetually in contact with what others ignore. And so you carry within you a double existence, one in the visible world and another in the invisible ocean of psychic energies. This double existence creates tension that few can understand. Outwardly, you may present as calm, rational, even detached. People mistake this composure for indifference. But inwardly, you are navigating torrents of meaning and undercurrents of emotion, interpreting not only what is, but what will be. Not only what is spoken, but what is hidden. This gap between outer appearance and inner reality widens over time, and with it grows the feeling of being misunderstood. Others ask, why do you complicate things? Why do you see problems where there are none? Why do you seem so distant? They cannot grasp that you are perceiving layers invisible to them, that your silence is not emptiness, but saturation. You withdraw, not because you feel nothing, but because you feel too much. In the language of archetypes, the empathic, intuitive stands in the place of the wounded healer. Like Chiron of Greek myth, who was immortal yet wounded, these souls carry a wound that never fully heals. Their wound is the inability to be untouched by the world. Every joy and sorrow of others leaves an imprint, and this imprint accumulates until their very body registers the suffering of those around them. Many INFJ and INTJ empaths experience mysterious physical symptoms: fatigue, heaviness, restlessness that have no medical explanation. These are not illnesses of the body, but signals of the psyche, reminders that the unconscious is carrying more than the ego can process. The misunderstood empath does not need only medicine. They need meaning, for their body itself becomes an archetypal language through which the unconscious speaks Yet there is another side to this wound. In the very place where they are most vulnerable lies their greatest strength. The wound opens them to depths of perception, inaccessible to those who live only on the surface. Because they cannot escape feeling, they are forced into intimacy with the archetypes. They come to know the face of grief, the voice of despair, the shadow of envy, the hunger of desire, not as abstract concepts, but as living realities coursing through them. And in knowing these, they become capable of guiding others through them. The wounded healer does not cure by being perfect, but by having suffered. So too, the misunderstood empath heals not by offering easy answers, but by embodying the truth that one can survive what seems unbearable. Their empathy becomes medicine when it is tempered by their own shadow. When it ceases to be pity and becomes presence, but we must be honest. Many of these empaths never reach this integration. Too many remain crushed beneath the weight of their sensitivity, too entangled in the projections of others, too lost in the labyrinth of their own foresight. They isolate themselves, convinced that no one can ever understand them. And so their gift withers into bitterness, or they sacrifice themselves endlessly, becoming martyrs who drown in the pain of others while neglecting their own soul. Both paths lead to destruction. The path of individuation calls for something harder, to stand in the tension, to endure the loneliness without collapsing into despair, to carry the wound without letting it define the whole. In dreams, this tension often appears as an image of carrying vessels filled with water. One dreamer of this empathic type saw herself walking up a mountain with jars strapped to her back. Each jar was heavy, sloshing with water that spilled onto the ground. She reached the summit only to discover that the jars had holes and the water had long since drained away. She fell in despair, realizing her effort was wasted. Yet, in the dream's final moment, she noticed that the mountain path itself was now blooming with flowers nourished by the spilled water. The unconscious revealed to her that what felt like wasted suffering had in fact fed the collective. This is often the fate of the misunderstood empath. Their gift is invisible, their sacrifice unnoticed, but the world around them is quietly transformed by the waters they carry. Still, it is not enough to unconsciously spill water for others. Consciousness is required. If the empath continues to carry without awareness, they remain enslaved to the archetype of the martyr. But if they awaken, if they see that their empathy must be guided and chosen, then they become alchemists rather than victims. The alchemist does not merely suffer the transformation, but participates in it. They know that the prima materia, the raw suffering, the lead of unconscious pain can be transmuted into gold, but only if placed in the vessel of consciousness. The misunderstood empath is called to this work, to take the raw flood of collective emotion, to place it in the vessel of their awareness, and to allow it to become meaning rather than mere burden. And yet, how lonely this calling remains. For the world rarely acknowledges alchemists until centuries later. The INFJ or INTJ empath may spend years feeling invisible, their insights dismissed their warnings ignored, their depths ridiculed. They may wonder if their gift is a curse, and in truth, it is both. Every archetype carries a double edge, blessing and danger intertwined. The gift of empathy is also the curse of alienation. The gift of foresight is also the curse of disbelief. The gift of intuition is also the curse of being misjudged. To accept the gift is to accept the curse. To resist the curse is to lose the gift. Thus, the empath's individuation demands a sacred yes to both sides. Let me tell you of another dream. A man of this type dreamt he stood before a great mirror. At first, it reflected his own face, but slowly, the mirror began to show the faces of others, friends, strangers, enemies, until hundreds of faces swirled upon its surface. At last, his own face disappeared, replaced entirely by the faces of others. In panic, he struck the mirror, and it shattered into 1,000 pieces. But in each shard he saw a fragment of his own face, multiplied and scattered. Here we see the danger of empathy without self. The self dissolves into others. And when the mirror is broken, only fragments remain. The unconscious wounds, without boundaries. The empath loses the core of their identity. To survive, they must learn to hold the mirror steady, to let others' faces appear without erasing their own. This is why shadow work is essential for the misunderstood empath. It is not enough to focus on light, on compassion, on vision. They must confront the parts of themselves they would rather deny, the rage they feel when their empathy is abused, the envy they harbor when others seem carefree while they are burdened, the lust that burns beneath their mask of restraint, the hunger for recognition they disguise as humility. All of these are shadows, and if unacknowledged, they will possess the empath more than any external projection. Only by facing them directly, by admitting them into consciousness, can the empath be free. For shadow is not evil, it is simply the unlived, and when it is lived consciously, it becomes strength. Indeed, some of the greatest healers are those who have embraced their shadow. They know their own capacity for destruction, and thus they wield their empathy with humility. They know their own hunger for control, and thus they allow others freedom. They know their own need for love, and thus they do not manipulate others into giving it. This integration is the goal of individuation. The misunderstood empath, once whole, becomes not only healer, but guide, capable of leading others into the depths, because they themselves have gone there. Yet, we must acknowledge that such wholeness is never final. Individuation is not a destination, but a process, a spiral in which the same lessons return at deeper levels. The empath will again and again face misunderstanding, loneliness, overwhelm. Each time they are invited to descend further, to embrace more shadow, to integrate more light. This is their path. And though it is arduous, it is sacred. For in walking it, they become embodiments of the archetypal journey itself. They become living myths, carrying within their lives the eternal drama of the soul's transformation. And so, if you are of this kind, know this: your life will not be simple. nor should it be, you will be misunderstood. Yes, but misunderstanding is a sign that you belong not only to this world, but to a deeper one. You are not here to fit, but to reveal. You are not here to echo, but to embody. The very strangeness that isolates you is the mark of your vocation. You are an empath. Yes, but more than that, you are a mirror of the collective unconscious, a bridge to the archetypal, a living symbol of the tension between self and other, light and shadow, future and present. To accept this is to accept both wound and gift. There is something in the misunderstood empath that longs for completion and a secret yearning, not merely to be seen by others, but to be reconciled within themselves. It is as if the INFJ or INTJ mind carries a hidden covenant with the unconscious, a pact made long before consciousness arose. This covenant whispers, you will see more than others see. You will feel more than others feel, and you will suffer more than others suffer, because through you the collective shall be transformed. And yet, when you wake each morning in the ordinary world, you do not feel chosen. You feel estranged, bewildered by why existence has placed such intensity upon your shoulders. Here lies the greatest misunderstanding. People imagine that you prefer your distance, when in truth, your distance is the result of too much closeness with what they cannot perceive. To live as an empathic intuitive is to be woven constantly into archetypal drama. Your relationships are never simply relationships. They are stages upon which ancient forces enact their scripts. The friend who clings to you is not only a friend, but the archetype of the abandoned child seeking the eternal parent. The partner who resents your distance is not only a lover, but the animus demanding recognition. The stranger whose eyes fill you with sorrow is not merely a passerby, but the embodiment of humanity's collective grief. Every encounter bears more weight than it appears, and this weight accumulates until you wonder if you are living your life or if your life has become the canvas for everyone else's unconscious. And yet, the unconscious itself insists that this is your initiation. For the empath cannot mature by rejecting the archetypes that flood them. They must instead learn to name them, to stand before them as one would stand before gods, acknowledging their power without collapsing into worship. You must learn to say, this is not mine alone. This is the child, the mother, the trickster, the shadow passing through me, and in saying this, you create the sacred distance that transforms possession into participation. Then you are no longer devoured by archetypes, but you dance with them. As Orpheus once played his lyre in Hades to charm even the gods of death, there is a vision I would give you here, a vision drawn not from books but from the atmosphere of the unconscious itself. Imagine a great hall filled with mirrors. Each mirror shows not your own reflection but the face of another, your family, your community, your culture, the forgotten ancestors, the unborn descendants. As you walk among them, you feel their emotions pressing upon you, their stories intertwining with your breath. You may think you are losing yourself, but in truth, you are learning that the self is never isolated. You are a nexus, a place where many streams converge. The task is not to smash the mirrors, nor to identify with them, but to learn to walk among them without forgetting your own reflection. This is the art of the misunderstood empath, to remain centered while the collective swirls around them. But remaining centered requires a descent into your own underworld. For many of you, the greatest danger is not that you will be overcome by others, but that you will never truly meet yourself. You are so attuned to the needs of those around you that your own voice becomes the faintest whisper. Years may pass, and you suddenly awaken to the realization that you have never asked, "What do I desire? What is my destiny?" Instead, you have lived as an echo chamber for the desires of others. This is why shadow work is indispensable. When you meet the parts of yourself that you fear, your anger, your selfishness, your lust, your ambition, you meet the guardians of your individuality. They appear dark because they have been repressed, but once you embrace them, they become allies. Anger becomes boundary. Lust becomes vitality. Ambition becomes purpose. I tell you now, if you do not claim these shadows, you will project them. You will see manipulation in others. Because you deny your own capacity to manipulate, you will see arrogance in others. Because you refuse to own your own hunger for recognition. You will see selfishness in others, because you cannot admit your own desire to live for yourself. And so long as you live in projection, you will remain misunderstood, most of all by yourself. To end this cycle, you must reclaim what is yours, even if it terrifies you. For individuation is not the path of purity, but the path of wholeness. The misunderstood empath often dreams of thresholds, doors, bridges, rivers, gates. These are not coincidences. They are symbols of the liminal role you play in existence. You are threshold beings, standing between conscious and unconscious, self and other, present and future. Your life will always feel transitional, never fully settled, because you are called to be passage rather than destination. Do not resist this. To be a threshold is not to be incomplete, it is to be essential. Without thresholds, no one can cross from one realm to another. You carry that mystery, but you must also rest. Empathy without rest becomes collapse. Intuition without grounding becomes paranoia. Vision without embodiment becomes fantasy. The misunderstood empath must learn rituals of grounding, walking in silence, creating, praying, writing, anything that brings the body back into harmony with the soul. Without this, the archetypal currents will tear you apart. With it, you become like a tree, rooted deep in the earth, even while its branches reach the sky. The deeper the roots, the higher the vision. And now, I must return to the beginning. Why is the empath so misunderstood? Because the world still fears what it cannot measure. It cannot accept that one can feel another's sorrow without words, that one can foresee events without evidence, that one can carry truths without proof. The world calls such things irrational, dramatic, or manipulative. But what the world calls irrational is often simply the voice of the unconscious speaking ahead of time. What it calls dramatic is the eruption of archetypal intensity. What it calls manipulative is the attempt to survive when one feels too much. Do not let these accusations define you, remember always that misunderstanding is the price of carrying the archetypal flame, and yet do not use this as an excuse for isolation or superiority. Your path is not to stand apart in bitterness, but to walk within the world with compassion and clarity. Yes, you will be misunderstood, but let this misunderstanding be your teacher, not your prison. Every time someone misjudges you, ask, what does this reveal about the archetypes at work between us? What shadow is being projected? In this way, even misunderstanding becomes a tool of individuation. You are not here to be ordinary. You are here to be symbolic. The INFJ and INTJ empath represents the archetype of the seer, the one who looks beyond appearances. You are not here to be easy to understand, but to awaken others to depths they would not otherwise enter. This is your gift. This is your burden. Do not waste your energy wishing to be simple. Simplicity is not your calling. Depth is. And so, I leave you with this. When you feel most alien, most estranged, most exhausted, or remember that you are participating in a pattern older than you, the prophets, the mystics, the visionaries, the wounded healers, all walked this path. They too were misunderstood, rejected, dismissed, but they carried on, not because they were promised recognition, but because the soul demanded it. You too must carry on, not because it is easy, not because it is fair, but because the unconscious has chosen you as its vessel. And if you can accept this not as curse but as destiny, you will find that your loneliness softens into solitude, your wounds harden into wisdom, and your misunderstandings transform into mysteries that others slowly learn to revere. Then you will know that you have not been abandoned by life, but initiated. For in the silence of your own soul, when all voices fall away, you will hear the self whisper, you were never misunderstood by me. I have always known you. I have always walked with you.